Density Living. Jason has left me in the studio. Oh, he's back in business. You know,
what up, motherfuckers?
We're getting back to White Sands incident. Yes, we are not done with it.
Where are you, in the Mojave Desert there? Where's this at, bro?
No, these are the...
What is this picture?
These are the white gypsum sands of southern New Mexico.
Not gypsies.
Not gypsies, gypsum.
Yeah, big difference.
I've actually seen a lot of gypsies.
Was this created by nuclear?
You know, that's
Did they bomb and shit on here?
They really... They did not drop any nukes over here in this area. That was over in...
Because I know there's a White Sands missile range or something, right?
Which is that area.
Yeah.
But where they actually did the Trinity test site is by Pie Town. Do you know where Pie Town is?
No, but I want to go to Pie Town. Is it great pizzas?
No, pie. Like pies.
Like 3.1. What?
3.1
forever.
3.1 forever.
Well, the pie's fucked up now too, right? Aren't they saying
pie's inaccurate? It always has been.
Yeah. So no Pie Town for you.
No.
Change the name.
Yeah.
Protect the innocent.
Yeah. But if you go to Western New Mexico, is where the Trinity test site was.
Is there sands like that there? Is that why? I wonder why they chose. It's just a rural area,
just an open area.
Like if we're gonna fuck up the whole world,
yeah,
then let's do it here.
If we're gonna create a ripple through space time,
no one's gonna matter in New Mexico.
No one's gonna care, and the aliens are coming out. Like, stop.
Well, yeah, in Russia, the aliens cut everything off.
Yeah, like don't do that.
Yeah, no,
don't do that.
I mean, there was several times we almost went into missile wars, to oblivion. Speaking of,
you know what? Why? Yeah, I think about it. Like, why? Why is there so much hate? Why do you all want to blow each other up?
It's
no, but like for what?
It's the race. It's the superiority. It's you have that. Well, we got to have that. Well, we got to have better than that, and then we secretly have to have this because we got to match this. Oh, so you have missiles. So now we got to find a way to shoot him down.
Oh gosh.
You remember '80s Star Wars Reagan?
Yeah, Reagan Star Wars. Yeah. They have this.
Is that still there? I mean, are we able to shoot missiles down out of the sky now? Is it?
Well, he tried to use lasers, but they had an issue because most of the lasers we were using required oxygen.
Yeah, well, I mean, they took them from lightsabers from Luke. Luke came down and was like, "Try this."
Yeah.
So this big lightsaber in the sky just goes, and then cuts the rocket in half.
They had this.
Don't believe anything. I say. This is for entertainment purposes only.
Star Wars watermelon.
I'm not a doctor.
Satellite. I think there was a... Give me 1 second here now that you brought that up. Space weapons. Brilliant Pebbles is what they called it.
It wasn't space balls?
No, there's this thing called... Brilliant Pebbles was a non-nuclear system of satellite-based watermelon-sized mini missiles.
Ooh.
Designed to use a high-velocity kinetic warhead. This happened in projects...
You ever had Warheads, the candy?
Oh my God, yeah.
It's about as intense as this warhead.
Intense as this warhead, yeah. But even think about the for the Star Wars program, their emblem was like the shield over the Earth.
Yeah, like the United States, we're protecting everything.
Do you guys realize that you have to put a shield up because of your ridiculous politics and lack of understanding of other people?
Yeah,
this is still the whole thing.
But it's kind of fucked up because you can't sit down at a table with China, or Russia and turn around and trust that we're going to have a great conversation. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, okay. Like, would you, if you sit down behind China and they're like, yeah, I think we should come to agreement. You get rid of your missiles, I'll get rid of mine. Like, could you trust them?
I wouldn't trust them.
No.
Would I do here's the difference though. Would I do what I said I was going to do? Yes. Go ahead, have your missiles. Go ahead, nuke us. Go ahead. Destroy the world. Enjoy it. Live with that guilt.
I think if we were talking about this on Tartle's episode about a collective consciousness. But whenever I see if nations got together and said, okay, 224 nations got together and said, we're not doing this. This is stupid. Humanity 2.0. Here we come.
Mm-hmm.
And then China was like, no, you can almost like shaming is really effective. You know what I mean? Like people hate that. Remember the Red Scarlet, and you had
Scarlet Letter.
Yeah. And you had to be put out from, and then Hitler did that with the Jews when he put them in certain ghettos and had them make them wear things.
It's like a cultural shaming.
Yeah.
And think about the people in China. They're like, why is our government acting like this?
Why are we the only ones with nuclear weapons? This is dumb.
This is dumb.
Yeah,
Yeah.
us in North Korea, and why?
To flex. So that just makes us like North Korea. We don't want to be like that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just stupid.
Yeah.
So if I sat down at a table, no, I wouldn't have to trust them, but I would get rid of what I would say.
Or for me, I would get rid of the missiles, but I would have a Star Wars type defense.
Oh, always have defense.
Yeah, I would say we're going to, screw all this. We're going to go into how can we set ourselves up to protect ourselves, to protect our population from war if they come at us. What's the because the best defense is your best offense.
Yeah, I will do things to protect human life.
Yes.
But I'm certainly also not going to use a weapon. You can't protect human life if someone's using a nuclear device.
Yeah,
you can't protect from a nuclear device with another nuclear device.
Yeah.
You need the anti-nuclear device.
Yeah.
You need something that just decommissions
shuts down
immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I'm pretty sure they have something like that.
Yeah, who knows?
Because there's been multiple those dirty bombs that they've shut down that people don't even know about.
Yep.
Like those suitcase bombs and stuff like that. And they've been able to, they have satellites that track nuclear signatures, even in as small as a briefcase.
Yep.
So they can look right now. They have these satellite imaging, I know State Department has this, where they can see and say, okay, here's a reactor here, and it shows all these points. And then if they move, it shows where they're moving. So they have constant 24/7,
Yeah, if you think it's not being monitored, it is. Everything has.
Why haven't this happened? Why haven't somebody gone to Disney World and released a nuke? A small nuke.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
They're always
There's a
prevented.
reason. Yeah,
they release nuclear substances release an energetic signature, a radiation signature, which can be spotted by satellites. They can be tracked all the time, everywhere, constantly. And you have the ability to move them underground all the time, and we have ground penetrating satellites. So it's really it's a lost cause. So things they're usually built and then stagnant. Yeah. All of the people involved in any sort of nuclear technology are well aware of others and their nuclear technology.
Yeah, it's so absolutely horrendous that we even have to have these conversations.
Yeah.
Chapter 4 in our cool book, The White Sands Incident.
Correct.
From New Mexico to New York and return at 8,000 miles per hour. If I were a writer or a poet, I could perhaps explain in some magnificent way the spectacular sight which met my eyes at the greatest metropolis in the world rotated slowly before me. Since I am neither a writer nor a poet, he's just a scientist, a doctor, but a technician with the limited vocabulary for expression, I fear that such a description is too difficult to attempt. As we descended to 20 miles above the city of New York, the lights were much brighter and they had greater individuality. It seemed as though a vast array of millions of blue-white diamonds lay scattered before me, scintillating and courseting against a black velvet background. The different temperatures of the various air strata combined with the rapid motion of the ship caused the lights to twinkle violently so that the entire city was a sea of pulsating, shimmering luminance.
Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm. 20 miles up.
20 miles up. It's good. You don't just have the lights. It's almost like just constant Christmas lights that are happening, which is of New York City.
Yeah, and he said, beautiful as this scene is, this is what he was thinking. Such a scientist. And interesting as this ride has been, I would gladly trade it all for a 5-minute tour of the mothership.
Yeah. I love seeing New York City, but man, do I want to go on the mothership.
Yeah, and then he replied, he was reading his mind, so he replied and he said, we regret that there was not enough time to arrange such a tour. But you remember that we are not yet adapted to your atmosphere, and as you yourself said, if you were to come into our ship, you would have to bring your atmosphere with you.
Which means you will require a special atmospheric suit.
Mm-hmm. And then he says this, while we are not nearly so enslaved by time as your race appears to be, nevertheless.
Enslaved by time.
We had a whole Chronos Kairos thing on this.
That reminds me of the Saturn, right? The god Saturn, being representative of time, and you're a slave to time.
Yeah, what was it? And he was eating his children, right?
Yeah, he was eating his child. That's biting his head off, right? But I just think it's interesting that they say that, which is really a function of they just live a lot longer. Mm-hmm. They aren't a slave to time. They have the ability to move through time, and they've extended their own lifespans. It's interesting how your perspective changes on what's a priority at that point. For us, it's like I gotta know right now. I gotta do it right now,
right?
Because all we're thinking is the limitation of our life, right? But for them, that limitation's been expanded so greatly. There's less pressure.
Yeah, but it's so funny how he says appears to be, like it's not reality.
Yeah.
Like you're enslaved by time, and it appears to be. He said, nevertheless, we are aboard a craft which derives its operating energy principally from natural differential sources.
Okay. All right. Let's get into this. Report a craft that takes its energy from differential sources.
Natural differential sources.
Okay. They are very evolved. That's obvious. Their ship is a closed system, has no waste. It also is made of materials that absorb anything that is freely around in the universe. Cosmic radiation, starlight, electromagnetics, heat, all of those things that we just take for granted they're flying around are energy.
Mm-hmm.
They carry an energetic signature. So to them, they're like, this is freely floating around. Why don't we just use everything around here, all these different types of energy, bring them together to charge up one specific thing to keep our ship moving?
I like that, yes.
That's their thought. And so the other interesting aspect of it, the mothership itself does not really need to move that quickly. They actually move with the ebb and flow of the cosmic radiations and everything else, those natural energy patterns that are happening throughout this
that's what he
universe.
says. He says, and even as men of your race who sail the sea, we have to find it necessary to sail with the tide.
Yeah, they sail with the tide, which is interesting. So if we have like this huge like cosmic wave of like, photons like moving through a specific area or sector of space, you ride with that. You move with the energies as they move, right? There's no difference between our ocean and the energies in space. One's very physical, one's very non-physical. You can't really see it.
Mm-hmm.
But they have the ability to capture it. They recognize the value of that. So you just have infinite energy that's around everywhere, and it's just going to feed your systems. It's perpetual.
Yeah, and they said that they're going to come visit the planet within a few months, and we have stored enough of your atmosphere to mix with ours for the time we will be gone. When we return, we will contact you again. So he's telling him, and then he says, we have names.
Yeah.
Though there is seldom any occasion to use them among our own people.
Okay, we gotta slow down.
Well, you
can't blow over that. If you've evolved to a point of collective,
mm-hmm.
you've evolved to a point of understanding that everything has a unique energy signature.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you need the name? The energy signature is already recognized.
Well, plus you're reading each other's brains, so it's
all
like,
the time.
Yeah.
Why do you need to say Jason?
Yeah.
Alexander?
Yeah.
Anybody? It's just like the thought's already there. You have the conversation.
All the thoughts are 100%.
All the time.
Yeah. So if I could walk by, if I'm walking by three people and I'm simultaneously reading all their thoughts and I'm a part of them collectively, because you would be a part of.
Yeah.
Because if people don't understand that, if everybody could read each other's brains, everybody would realize how fucked up we are.
Yeah.
And it would just solve a lot of problems.
There was a movie that came out recently with the kid who played Spider-Man. And I think it was called like Chaos Walking.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's thoughts were just like blowing out of their head and everybody could hear it. Right. And you could almost visually see it. They called it noise or something. I forget what it was. But it's an interesting idea. But that refines over time. You become more evolved. You don't need to talk. There's an appreciation for silence and just perfect transmission and receiving. We're not creating all this noise. Consider this. If you hear a cargo by and it's making exhaust noise, that's systems waste.
Yes.
If it's making road noise, that's systems waste. Energy is created to make those sounds. They capture all that stuff. So your systems also mirror how you communicate. There's no waste in the communication. Instantaneous, absolutely direct. Nothing is abstract. You can feel and see the emotions and pictures that are in my own head.
Yeah. So this makes perfect sense to me. He does have a name though, and it's he says his name is Alan, which is a common name here, but he says it's also Alon or
Alon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same.
So he's like, oh, interesting. On Earth, I can just call myself Alan.
Yeah,
but it's Alon.
Alon, yeah. And then Dr. Fry talks about he's moving from New Mexico to California for a project. And Alan says this, as to you being in California when we return, this should make little difference in our ability to contact you. As I said, your mind receives well. Yeah. In fact, if you had a little more practice in resolving mental images, it might have been possible for us to have shown you the details of our own craft without the necessity of you being in it.
Yeah, you don't have to go, we're so obsessed with like the material thing, have to be there, have to go experience it. When you go to experience something, the experience always happens in your mind, even though the body is there. You could experience everything in the world if you just sat down and closed your eyes. Truthfully. You don't have to actually go there.
Well, yeah, astral projecting.
All that stuff. It's just as potent, right? And that's their point.
Yeah, and so Alan kind of he says it perceives that he changes his voice and it becomes soft and smooth, and then he gets into describing the craft in a visualization to him. And he says the large drum-like structure just above the central bulkhead is the differential accumulator.
Differential accumulator.
Yeah, differential accumulator.
So accumulate, something that's grabbing and storing. Differential means it can take things of different wavelengths.
Right.
So it's taking in multiple energies that are happening to store within its actual capacity.
So it's like a battery, and then it can charge.
That I can just put out on this table, and it's just charging itself. Why don't we have shit like that?
Well, I don't know. He used an example. He said, for example, in your stratosphere, there are layers of ionized gas, which, even though they are rarefied, are also highly charged. Yep. By placing the ship in a planetary orbit at this level, it is able to collect during each revolution.
You know, everyone's like, why are the UFOs so high in the sky and you can't get on camera? They're just hanging out in the ionosphere. Free energy.
Yeah.
Their cameras, their ability to observe, they don't have to be close.
No.
Why would you? I'm going to sit in the place. I'm going to charge up, bomb around up here. And if I want to get close, mess around with your military, I will.
I mean, yeah, they don't even have to come even. I mean, the SR-71 cameras, we can be in space and take pictures of shit. And that was from
you
the
can
1960s.
get a license plate. A license plate in the 60s from space.
Yeah, so imagine what they have being millions of years evolved.
Yeah.
That's silly.
It is silly, isn't it?
And he says, and it would also receive a continuous flow of high energy electrons from the sun. So you have this energy differential.
So they're
in orbit.
I have an energy differential sitting in the ionosphere. The atmosphere itself is charging, plus the sun coming down, receiving those light photons, the electrons and stuff that's happening with that. That's all being accumulated. They just charge the batteries, just hanging out up there.
Yeah, and charged to him is different than charged what we view it as, like charging your iPhone or whatever. The word charged, so he gives a definition of charge. I merely mean that a potential difference is created between two poles of the accumulator. Okay,
so, gosh, I think I drew out a diagram here. So the accumulator, almost like a magnet. You have your positive and negative pole, north, south, whatever you want to call it. What happens is, because there's a differential, because one pole may have a charge different than the other, things are trying to always move back into equilibrium. So that change in movement is the thing that actually creates that energy storage, right? That change movement, that's the capture, is when there's a difference between these poles. And holding that difference and moving them back and forth, that's where your energy is actually occurring.
Yeah, and he says the material of the two poles has available free electrons in quantities beyond anything of which you could conceive.
Right. So free electrons allow for the binding of energies, right? If I have all these free electrons here, it allows the ability to capture things of different wavelengths, regardless of what it might be. And they use titanium, like we talked about before, and they blast it with photons to create sort of that electron field. But what they are also saying here is that they have a material, whatever it might be, that is naturally just beaming with free electrons. And that's what they're using for their energy accumulator.
Yeah, and he gets into electrodynamics a little bit. He says the tremendous surge of electrons through the force rings produces a very strong magnetic field.
Oh, boy. Okay. Force rings. Rings of force are saying we want to define what direction this electromagnetic gravitational field is going through. So as we capture energy, we need to rechannel it. And these force rings, depending on their dimension and how many there are, afford for the control of the essentially artificial gravity that is being created.
Well, I mean, this is funny. We were talking about this with Sherpa Vision, but Aquaman with his rings.
Yes.
I mean, it's a perfect example. It produces a field which oscillates in a pattern. And and then he can change. He can go into animals' brains and tell them to do things.
Yeah, help me.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's happening here. Is you're using those oscillations, which tells you that they think about energy and wavelength all the time. Okay, yeah. So you're managing the frequencies, and when you harmonize them in specific resonance, when it hits a peak resonance, is when you have now this new field being generated around the actual craft itself.
Yeah, he says, in this way, we can create magnetic resonance between the two rings or between the several segments of a single ring.
Yeah.
Which I thought was cool. a single ring that has segments?
which is nuts.
Is it like different materials, or?
And you create the resonance in between. It's like each one's singing at
Yeah.
different points, but you match them all together to create this huge like
Yeah,
field.
I was thinking of like a ring,
effect.
and then you could have like gold, titanium.
Sounds dope.
You know, like in different
What
parts.
you're
And so that's
thinking-
creating a different resonance.
what you're
with-
thinking is probably correct.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know because they didn't go into it.
As you also know, any magnetic field which is changing in intensity will create an electric field, which at any given instance is equal in amplitude, opposite in sign, and perpendicular to the magnetic field. So let's stop right here, because this is interesting, actually.
In physics,
I had to read this 10 times.
yeah, I always used to have physics professors talk about directions of force,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd always use this 3-finger analogy, right, to show like what the vectors are. You got forward, you have vertical, and then perpendicular to that. And so what they're saying is, because of the direction of these poles and the magnetic energy here, the electromagnetic energy emits in an opposite direction of force.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what they're describing. And it's negative because it's moving away from, and then they're changing that. It's a different change of vector. So this magnetic field
Right.
is going to match in perfect amplitude the electrogenerative force, electromagnetic field that is happening from the generation of that magnetic resonance.
Yeah, and he gets into direction. He explains it, and this is really cool. If the two fields become mutually resonant,
Yes.
a vector force will be generated. The effect is similar to and in fact identical with the gravitational field.
Okay.
So now we understand.
How does the Earth work?
Yeah.
Okay. How do we have gravity on Earth? Earth has mass. This mass, okay, is generating a electromagnetic output from our core. That electromagnetic output, the magnetism and the electro force are matching each other in resonance, creating a stable gravity here on our planet.
Mm-hmm.
Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm.
What they're doing is they're repeating the process of what a planet does by using an artificially engineered core that they have through a differential accumulator, forcing it through rings of resonance. Think about our Earth. We have rings around it all the time. We think about it all the time, even in maps, okay? They're doing this in a very directed form. And then if they match the magnetic resonance with the electric resonance, bring them together, I've now created a gravitational field much like a planet has.
Yeah, and he says if the center of the field coincides with the craft's center of gravity, its only effect will be to increase the inertia. That's what I thought was interesting. Increase the inertia or the mass of the craft.
Yes.
So you're putting there's pressure.
Yeah, think about it's falling into itself.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
You can, the more electromagnetic force you're creating in this field, the deeper the gravity, the more of a well in the fabric of space-time you are creating.
Which is crazy because the craft would have to be tremendously strong so it doesn't implode.
So it doesn't. Well, the thing is, it won't crush on itself.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah.
Because the field is generated outside of the craft, not internally. So imagine if it created the gravitational field inside of the craft itself, not outside of it. The body of the craft would just crush into itself, right? So you'd have to make sure that it expands just beyond the size of the craft. Now, let's think about something. How would a craft then move out of dimension?
Mm-hmm.
What you're doing is you're increasing the mass of the craft so much, sucking in so much energy, that the mass exceeds where it needs to go past the speed of light. So it's going to drop out of this dimension. It essentially too heavy through our fabric of space-time, moves into time-space, and that allows them the ability to shift through time at that point. You've essentially sped up so much energy and so much mass that it's exceeded this thing tremendously, not having an effect internally, but on the outside, it's like putting a bowling ball on something that just flips inside out on itself. But the question is, I have something that's floating in the sky, creating this field, this gravity field. It's essentially its own mini planet.
Mm-hmm.
How are they just not smashing into each other? How are these gravities working? If I have the gravity of the Earth and the gravity of another object like the Earth and the Moon, why aren't they pulling into one another? Well, here's the interesting aspect, which they'll get into, and I'll front load this. The center of gravity of this field that's being created, this inertia, it's not really moving anywhere because it's centralized.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when we move that point of inertia on a side of a ship?
Yes.
What happens is the field of the ship gets pulled towards the point of inertia.
Mm-hmm.
When we think of a car, we're pushing ourselves forward, right? Train, planes, automobiles, we have to create thrust to push forward.
Mm-hmm.
They're not doing a pushing motion. they essentially move the heaviest point of gravity
Mhm.
or inertia to where they want to be, and it pulls the craft forward into it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be this. Why don't atoms collide and and hate each other? There's perfect little centers of energy.
Yeah.
So it'd be the same as this craft.
And when think about water, water does not push forward; it gets pulled forward.
Yeah. He uses a really simple analogy. I think it's interesting. And this is 1960s, so you have to understand. He said, would be a small boy who harnesses dog to his toy wagon. He uses the word wiener, I'll say hot dog. Ties a hot dog to the end of a stick and holds the hot dog in front of the dog's nose.
Yep.
The dog will, of course, pursue the hot dog and so pull the wagon. But because of the position of the hot dog is fixed with respect to the wagon, the dog will never overtake it.
That's correct. So you'll never overtake that point of inertia, the maximum energy point of that field being artificially generated.
Right.
So you're always falling towards it. You can never go beyond it.
Yeah, and everybody gets into free energy, and this is really cool because he says this. He says, note that this system does not involve free energy, or what your people refer to as perpetual motion. In pulling the wagon, the dog is dissipating considerable energy differential. And while he does not overtake the hot dog, he must be fed regularly with the process to continue. So the dog is it's getting its energy.
Yeah.
It's expending its energy to try to grab something that it can never grab.
Right. So the ship
Yes.
is expending energy to put something in front of it to chase. It's chasing itself,
Yes.
but you still have to feed the thing that allows it to chase itself. And that's why they have a differential accumulator that charges that up and affords them to move through space like that.
Yeah, and we'll do this last one on chapter 4 here, and then we'll close out. To slow or stop the craft, the controls are adjusted so that the field is generated just beyond the center of gravity so that negative acceleration will result.
Okay, so
that seems simple to me.
I have created momentum through space by putting my point of inertia in front of me. Now I need to slow down. So I'm going to actually bring that point of inertia back just behind me. Imagine I'm sitting in the cockpit. Now I've moved it just behind me. It's slowly decelerating. It's essentially gravity pulling the craft back from the momentum it's created by having the inertia in front of it.
Yeah. No,
Is this clear? Is this making sense?
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. And we're going to get into the inside compartment
Yeah.
on the next episode.
Yeah. So I hope you guys enjoyed that.